Look down at what you are wearing right now. A shirt, pants, maybe shoes. You put them on this morning without thinking. You have been doing it your entire life. But here is the strange thing for the vast majority of human existence. No one did. And the real reason your ancestors finally started covering their bodies has almost nothing to do with cold weather, modesty, or shame. The answer is far stranger than you think. Let us start with the body itself. Your skin is remarkable. It is the largest organ you have. It breathes, sweats, regulates heat, and communicates with the world around it. It is also almost entirely bare. Compared to nearly every other primate on Earth, you are essentially naked. A chimpanzee, your closest living relative, has fur covering most of its body. You do not. Scientists call this condition secondary altriciality, the loss of a protective coat that most mammals are born with. You lost yours somewhere along the evolutionary road, and for a long time, no one was entirely sure why. The old story said you started wearing clothes when you moved into cold climates. Ice ages came, temperatures dropped, you needed insulation, so you wrapped yourself in animal skins. Simple, clean, logical. The problem is the timeline does not match. Anatomically modern humans appeared around 300,000 years ago. The first clear genetic evidence that humans were wearing clothes, real clothes, tailored and fitted only shows up around 100,000 to 170,000 years ago, depending on the study. And the methods used to figure this out are not what you would expect. Nobody found a prehistoric shirt. Fabric rots. What scientists found instead was something much smaller. Lice. In 2011, a team of researchers led by David Reed at the Florida Museum of Natural History published a groundbreaking study on human lice. There are two types of lice that live on the human body: head lice and body lice. Head lice live in your hair. Body lice live in clothing. They are genetically distinct, but they share a common ancestor. Reed and his team used the rate of genetic divergence between the two populations, essentially a molecular clock, to figure out when body lice first evolved. The answer pointed to somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. That is when clothing lice first diverged from hair lice. That is when clothes existed for long enough to create an entirely new ecological niche for a parasite to evolve into. But here is what that timeline tells you. Humans were wearing clothes tens of thousands of years before the most severe ice ages arrived. Cold weather was not the primary driver. Something else came first. Researcher Mark Stoneking, one of the key figures in the lice study, described this finding as opening a new way of thinking about early human behavior. If clothes predate the coldest climates, the real motivation must have been something else, something more immediate, something that was already threatening human survival long before the glaciers advanced. The answer comes from another direction entirely: your skin. When your ancestors lost their fur, they gained something extraordinary: the ability to sweat efficiently across almost the entire body surface. No other primate can do this. A running chimpanzee overheats within minutes. Your ancestors could run for hours. Scientists call this persistence hunting, the ability to chase prey across open savanna until the animal collapsed from heat exhaustion. You are, in evolutionary terms, one of the greatest endurance machines ever built. Your nakedness made that possible. But naked skin in open grassland comes with a cost: parasites. Ticks, biting flies, fleas, and insects of every description have direct access to warm, exposed skin. In a forested environment with dense fur, many of these cannot latch on effectively. On bare skin in open grassland, they can feed freely, and they are not just annoying, they carry diseases: sleeping sickness, typhus, spotted fever, malaria. A single infected tick bite can kill. In an environment where medical care does not exist and immune systems have never encountered these pathogens, parasite load was not a minor inconvenience. It was one of the most significant threats to survival your ancestors faced. This is where clothing begins to make a different kind of sense. Not as insulation, as armor. Researcher Gillian Chu and colleagues at the University of Reading proposed what is sometimes called the parasite defense hypothesis, the idea that the earliest coverings were not full garments at all, but targeted wraps, strips of hide or fiber tied around the legs, waist, and torso, the areas most exposed to biting insects during movement through grassland, the areas where tick attachment is most common. The areas where blood-sucking flies hover when you are in motion. Think about that. The first thing you covered was not what you might assume. It was your legs, your waist, the lower body, because that is where the threat was most immediate. Over time, the behavior of wrapping became habit. Habit became technology. Simple strips became shaped pieces. Shaped pieces became fitted garments. Each generation refined the craft. And somewhere in that long arc of refinement, the ecological function of protection began to fuse with something else, entirely social meaning. This is the part that is easy to underestimate. Clothing did not just protect the body. It began to signal things: who you were, where you came from, what group you belonged to. Archaeological evidence from sites like Blombo's Cave in South Africa, sites dating back 75,000 to 100,000 years, shows early humans engaged in symbolic behavior. They were making ochre pigments, engraving abstract patterns, wearing shell beads as personal ornaments. They were thinking in symbols long before writing existed. And when clothing arrived, it entered that symbolic world immediately. A wrap dyed with ochre is not just protection, it is identity. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying the Ju-Hoanzi San people of the Kalahari, one of the few surviving hunter-gatherer cultures still practicing traditions with deep prehistoric roots. She documented how even the simplest forms of personal decoration, how objects are worn, which pigments are used, how coverings are shaped, carry enormous amounts of social information. They mark age, status, alliance, kinship. The object on the body becomes a message to every other person who sees it. Your ancestors were doing this at least 70,000 years ago, possibly earlier. So the real story of why you wear clothes is layered. It begins with a naked body exposed to a world full of biting, disease-carrying parasites on an open savanna. It begins with the urgent biological need to reduce that exposure, not because of cold, but because of infection. Then it moves into technology, the slow refinement of wrapping into garment. Then into something unmistakably human, the use of what covers the body as a language, a way of speaking without words about who you are and where you belong. There is one more layer, the psychological one. In virtually every human culture ever documented, some form of bodily covering is associated with adulthood, status, or ceremony. Even cultures in warm climates where clothing offers no thermal advantage still wrap, paint, or adorn the body. Anthropologists have found no culture in human history that practices total bodily exposure in all social contexts. The need to mark the body to signal through the surface of the skin appears to be universal. Not taught, not imposed from outside, emerging from something deeper in how the human mind builds social reality. You were born into a world where clothing is so embedded in daily life that you rarely think about it. You do not get dressed in the morning with any awareness of the 170,000-year story you are participating in. You do not notice that every fabric choice, every color, every cut is still doing exactly what those first wraps of hide were doing, positioning you in a social world, communicating things about you that you might not even consciously intend. Look down again at what you are wearing right now. A shirt, pants, maybe shoes. You put them on this morning without thinking. But something inside you, something far older than any memory you carry, already knew exactly what they were for.